I never imagined that the man I'd loved for 22 years would look me in the eye and tell me I was used up. Those were his exact words. Used up. Like I was a car he'd driven into the ground and was ready to trade in for a newer model. I stood in our kitchen, the kitchen I'd renovated myself, tile by tile, while he was too busy with work. And I felt something inside me crack in a way that would never fully heal back to what it was before. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came 3 weeks later, when a woman half my age walked into my life and handed me a folder that would burn my husband's entire world to the ground. My name is Diane. I'm 49 years old, and until 8 months ago, I thought I had a good marriage. Let me back up. I met Richard when I was 26. He was 31, charming in that easy way some men are, the kind of charm that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room, even at a crowded party. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I remember he spilled lemonade on my sandals and spent the next 20 minutes apologizing so earnestly that I ended up comforting him instead of the other way around. That was Richard. He had a gift for turning things around so smoothly you didn't notice the direction had changed. We got married 18 months after we met. I remember my mother telling me, Diane, marry someone who makes you laugh, because looks fade and money comes and goes. But laughter, that's what gets you through the hard years. Richard made me laugh. God, he used to make me laugh until my stomach hurt, until I couldn't breathe, until the neighbors in our first apartment banged on the wall because we were being too loud at midnight over some dumb joke about the pizza guy. We built a life together. I gave up a promising career in interior design to raise our two kids, Emma and Cole, because Richard's job as a regional sales director meant constant travel, and someone needed to be the steady hand at home. I told myself it was a partnership. He worked, I ran the household, and together we built something solid, or so I believed. Emma is 20 now, in her junior year at State, studying communications with dreams of working in publishing. Cole is 17, a senior in high school, still living at home, still needing his mom to remind him to do his laundry, still leaving cereal bowls in his room despite 17 years of being asked not to. They're good kids. They're the reason I stayed sane through what came next. For most of our marriage, things felt normal. Not perfect, no marriage is, but normal. We had our routines. Sunday dinners with his parents, where his mother would always find some small way to compare me unfavorably to Richard's college girlfriend, a woman I'd never met and who existed only as a ghost of comparison. Summer trips to the lake house his family owned in Michigan, where I learned to fillet a fish because his father thought it was funny that a city girl didn't know how. Richard's job took him away 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, and I filled those nights with carpool schedules and school projects and PTA meetings and the quiet loneliness that a lot of stay-at-home wives learn to swallow without complaint. I want to be honest, there were good years in there too. Real ones. Richard used to leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror before early flights. He never missed a single one of Cole's baseball games, not one, even when it meant catching a red eye back. For a long time, I thought I knew this man completely. The first small crack appeared about 2 years ago, though I didn't recognize it as a crack at the time. Richard started caring more about his appearance. New gym membership. New wardrobe. Suddenly he was wearing fitted shirts instead of the loose polos he'd worn for a decade. He got a haircut that cost triple what he used to spend, started using some kind of skincare routine he'd never bothered with before, even asked me once, almost sheepishly, whether I thought he looked too old for a certain jacket. He started saying things like, I just want to feel good about myself, Diane, is that a crime? And I believed him, because why wouldn't I? Men go through things too. Midlife stuff, I supported it. I even joined a yoga class with him for a few months, trying to be part of whatever this new chapter was, driving 40 minutes each way twice a week because it was the only studio with a schedule that fit his flights. Looking back now, I wish I had paid attention to the way he started angling his phone away from me at dinner. I wish I had noticed how he'd take calls in the garage instead of the kitchen. I wish I had asked more questions when he mentioned, almost too casually, a new hire on his team named Sabrina, who was sharp and going places. At the time, it seemed like nothing. In hindsight, it was everything. The travel increased. What used to be 3 nights a week became 5. Sometimes he'd be gone for what he called extended client retention trips, which I now understand is corporate language for something entirely different. I never suspected anything, not really, not because I was naive, but because Richard had spent over 2 decades building my trust, brick by brick, and it never occurred to me that a person could spend that long constructing something just to burn it down. There was a night, maybe 8 months before everything fell apart, when I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket while doing laundry. 2 nights, a city he wasn't supposed to be in. When I asked him about it, he barely missed a beat. Said the client meeting got moved last minute, said he forgot to mention it, said I was being a little paranoid lately, don't you think? And I apologized. I actually apologized to him for asking a reasonable question about a piece of paper I found in his own pocket. That's the part that haunts me most now, how easily I talk myself out of my own instincts. The comment that broke me happened on a Tuesday evening in March. I remember it was raining, one of those cold early spring rains that makes everything smell like wet concrete and dead leaves. I had made his favorite dinner, pot roast, the recipe from his mother, the one that takes 4 hours and makes the whole house smell like childhood, because he'd texted that he had a rough week and needed something comforting. He came home late, distracted, barely touched the food, kept checking his phone under the table like he thought I couldn't see the glow of it reflecting off his face. I asked him if everything was okay, and he just stared at me across the table for a long moment before he said it. Diane, I think we both know this isn't working anymore. I thought he meant dinner. I genuinely thought, for one absurd second, that he was talking about the pot roast being overcooked, that maybe I'd left it in too long and dried it out. Then he said the rest. He said he'd been feeling disconnected for a long time. He said marriage was about growth, and he felt like he'd outgrown where we were. He used words like journey and authentic self, phrases I would later realize he must have picked up from someone else entirely, because Richard had never spoken like that in his life. And then, when I asked him with my voice shaking what exactly he meant, what had changed, who had changed him, he said the words that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You've let yourself go, Diane. I'm sorry, but you have. I'm still in my prime. You're not anymore. I think you know that. 49 years old, and my husband told me I was used up, like I was a warranty that had expired, like 2 decades of raising his children and running his household and showing up to every single one of his family's holidays had simply been a slow depreciation he'd finally decided to write off. I didn't cry in front of him. I want that on record. I stood up from the table, cleared his plate, because apparently some habits of 22 years don't disappear even in your worst moment. And I walked upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom and cried until Cole knocked on the door asking if I was okay. And I had to lie to my own son, my voice thick and unsteady through the door, and tell him I was fine. Richard moved into the guest room that night, sleeping there for exactly 11 days, during which we barely spoke except to coordinate who was picking Cole up from practice. Within 2 weeks, he'd moved into an apartment across town, one he claimed he'd only just started renting, though the lease, I'd later learn, had actually begun 4 months earlier. I spent those first weeks in a fog I can barely describe now. There were mornings I didn't get out of bed until Cole had already left for school. Mornings I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes just to compose myself before walking into a grocery store. Emma came home from school for a weekend just to sit with me, canceling plans with her friends without a second thought, and I remember feeling guilty for needing her that much. Cole started coming home straight after school instead of going to his friends' houses, like he was afraid to leave me alone in the house too long. My sister Patty called every single day, sometimes twice, just to check that I'd eaten something. Everyone kept telling me the same thing. You'll find yourself again, you're strong, this is his loss. I appreciated it, I really did, but none of it touched the hollowness inside me. I had built my entire identity around being Richard's wife, Emma and Cole's mother, the woman who held the family together. Without that first title, I didn't know who I was anymore. I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror some mornings and just look at myself, searching for whatever it was he saw that made him say what he said. Then on a Thursday afternoon in early April, everything changed. I was at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle in old jeans and a sweatshirt, hair thrown up in a bun, makeup non-existent, feeling every bit as used up as Richard had told me I was. I remember I was comparing prices on oatmeal of all things, some small mundane act of normalcy I was clinging to. That's when a young woman approached me, hovering at the edge of the aisle for a moment before she worked up the nerve to actually speak. She was maybe 26, 27, around the age I'd been when I married Richard, which felt like a cruel little joke from the universe. She was beautiful in that effortless way young women don't yet realize is effortless, and she was holding a manila folder against her chest like it was something precious or something dangerous, her knuckles slightly pale from how tightly she gripped it. Are you Diane? She asked. Diane Whitfield? I nodded, confused, my guard instantly rising, some old maternal instinct telling me this wasn't a coincidence. My name is Sabrina, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the second word. I think you need to see what's in this folder. And I think we might have more in common than either of us wants. She held it out to me with a trembling hand, and for a moment neither of us moved, the two of us just standing there in the fluorescent light of a grocery store aisle, while other shoppers pushed their carts around us, oblivious. I had no idea that the folder in her hands contained information that would not only explain everything that happened over the past year of my marriage, but would also reveal a secret Richard had been hiding for far longer than I could have ever imagined. One that would put his entire career, his reputation, and his freedom at risk. I took the folder. I opened it right there in the cereal aisle, my hands unsteady, Sabrina watching me with an expression somewhere between guilt and desperate relief. And the moment I read the first page, I understood that my divorce from Richard was about to become the least of his problems. The first page was a printed email chain. I didn't understand it at first. The language was corporate, full of terms like quarterly incentive restructure and confidential distribution agreement. But then I saw the signature block at the bottom of one message, and my stomach dropped straight through the tile floor of that grocery store. It was Richard's name. But it wasn't his job title. Regional sales director was what I'd believed for 3 years. What I was looking at said senior partner, Meridian Wellness Group, a company I had never once heard him mention. I don't understand, I said to Sabrina, my voice barely above a whisper. Who are you? Why do you have this? She glanced around the aisle, suddenly aware of how exposed we were. Two strangers hunched over a folder full of secrets between the oatmeal and the granola bars. Can we go somewhere else? A coffee shop, anywhere. I promise I'll explain everything. I couldn't keep sitting on this by myself anymore. I should have said no. Looking back, any reasonable person would have told me to walk away from a strange woman handing me mysterious documents in a grocery store. But something in her face stopped me. She looked scared, and more than that, she looked like she recognized something in me. Like she'd been carrying a weight for a long time and had finally found someone she could set part of it down with. We ended up at a small coffee shop 2 blocks away, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, empty enough at 3 in the afternoon that we could talk without an audience. I ordered black coffee because my hands were shaking too much to manage cream and sugar without spilling something. Sabrina ordered tea she never touched. I worked, Richard, she said. For the last year and a half, I was hired as a junior associate. At Meridian Wellness Group, I said, testing the name out loud, still foreign in my mouth. She nodded. It's a company Richard co-founded 4 years ago. It's not, Diane, it's not affiliated with the sales job you think he has. I mean, it is sort of, it grew out of contacts he made there, but it's a completely separate operation. A wellness supplement company, direct sales, recruitment based. He's been running it on the side this entire time. I sat back in my chair trying to absorb this. 4 years. 4 years of a business I never knew existed, run by the man I shared a bed with, a bank account with, a life with. Why would he hide a business from me? I asked, though even as I said it, some part of me already suspected the answer wouldn't be simple. Sabrina hesitated, turning her teacup slowly on its saucer, because it's not entirely legal. Or, it's legal on paper, barely, but what he's actually doing with it isn't. He's been funneling money through it. Client retention accounts, recruitment bonuses, some kind of shell structure with a business partner in Nevada. I didn't understand all of it when I started. I was 24, fresh out of grad school, and he made it sound like an incredible opportunity. He was so. She stopped herself and I watched something flicker across her face, embarrassment maybe or shame. He was so what? I asked, though I think I already knew. Convincing, she said quietly. Charming. He made me feel like the smartest person in every room. Told me I had instincts most people spend a decade developing. I thought he saw something special in me professionally. She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since we'd sat down. It took me almost a year to realize it wasn't just professional interest. There it was. The thing I'd been bracing for since she first said my name in that cereal aisle. You and Richard, I said. It wasn't really a question. For 8 months, she said, and her voice cracked again, worse this time. I need you to know, I'm not proud of it. I didn't know he was married when it started. He told me he was separated, going through a difficult divorce, that his wife had already moved on emotionally years ago, and they were just waiting until his son graduated to make it official. He said you two had an understanding. I laughed. It came out sharp and humorless, more of a bark than a laugh, and it startled both of us, an understanding. 22 years of marriage, 2 children, a mortgage, his mother's pot roast recipe, and he'd reduced it to an understanding so he could sleep with a woman young enough to be his daughter. When did you find out that there wasn't an understanding? I asked. About 4 months ago, she said. I saw a photo on his phone. Your son's birthday party. From last fall. You were in it. You looked happy. Really happy. All of you, like a family that actually eats dinner together and means it. And I asked him about it, and he got angry, really angry in a way I hadn't seen before, and told me it wasn't my business to be looking through his photos. That's when I started to understand that maybe I wasn't seeing the whole picture. I thought about that Tuesday in March. The rain, the pot roast, the way he'd barely looked up from his phone. I wondered if Sabrina had been the reason for his distraction that night, or if there was someone else entirely, some third thread in a tapestry I was only beginning to see the size of. Why come to me now? I asked. Why not 4 months ago when you found out? Sabrina reached into the folder and pulled out another document, sliding it across the table to me. It was a printed bank statement, the name on top not Richard's, not Meridian Wellness Group's, but a company called Halcyon Ventures, LLC. Because 3 weeks ago, I found out he's been doing it again, she said, recruiting someone new, younger than me, 22, just started at the company. Same script, practically word for word, the separated but not quite divorced story, the compliments about her instincts, the whole thing. And I realized that if I didn't say something, he was just going to keep doing this. To her, to whoever comes after her, and to you, because I don't think you have any idea what he's actually built behind your back, financially. I found things in the accounting, Diane. Things that go a lot deeper than an affair. I stared at the bank statement, the numbers swimming slightly, my mind still catching up on everything hitting me at once. Betrayal stacked on betrayal, like discovering a house you'd lived in for 2 decades had secret rooms you never knew existed. Rooms with locks you didn't have keys for. What kind of things, I said, my voice flat now, exhausted past the point of shock. There's money moving out of joint accounts you probably don't monitor closely. I saw transfers referencing an account ending in 4471. Does that number mean anything to you? It did. It was the tail end of our home equity line of credit, the one we'd opened 3 years ago to cover what Richard told me was a temporary cash flow issue with his sales territory bonuses. I remembered signing papers at the kitchen table, trusting him completely, not reading every line because why would I? He was my husband. He'd never lie to me about something that mattered. He told me that was for renovations, I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. The deck. The new roof. Sabrina's expression told me everything before she said the words. I don't think that money went toward your roof, Diane. Based on what I saw, over the last 2 years, roughly $240,000 moved out of accounts with your name on them and into Halcyon Ventures. I don't know all of what it was used for. Some of it I think funded travel, some of it went to gifts, jewelry, at least once a hotel suite that cost more than my monthly salary. I think some of it also just disappeared into accounts I couldn't trace. I felt something in my chest go very still, very cold, a kind of clarity settling over the numbness. This wasn't just a husband who'd fallen out of love with his wife and cruelly told her so. This was a man who had been systematically, deliberately building an entire second life, financial, romantic, professional, funded in part by money that belonged to our family, to our children's college funds, to the home we'd raised them in. Why are you telling me this? I asked, again, needing to understand her motives fully before I let myself trust a single word of it. You could lose everything by coming forward. Your job, certainly. Maybe more if you were involved in any of this. Sabrina's eyes filled, and for the first time since we'd sat down, she looked less like a woman delivering devastating news and more like a young person who had made a terrible mistake and was trying desperately to find her way back to being someone she could respect. Because 2 nights ago, the new girl, her name is Jessica, she came to me, crying, asking if I knew anything about a man named Richard Whitfield who kept telling her they were meant to find each other and that his marriage was basically over, Sabrina said. And I looked at her and I saw myself 18 months up, and I realized I could either keep protecting myself by staying quiet or I could finally do the one decent thing available to me. I chose the folder. I've spent the last 2 nights pulling together everything I could find in the shared drives before someone locks me out of the system, which I assume will happen very soon once he realizes documents are missing. I sat there holding a folder that contained the architecture of my husband's entire double life. His second business, his affair, his affair's replacement affair, and a financial trail that suggested he'd been quietly draining money from our family for years and under my nose. Somewhere in the last 20 minutes, the grief I'd been carrying since that Tuesday in March had curdled into something else entirely. Something colder. Something that didn't cry. I need copies of everything, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. And I need the name of a lawyer. A good one. Not the kind Richard's firm would send Christmas cards to. Sabrina almost smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I already looked into that too. There's an attorney my cousin used for something similar, a woman named Carol Ann Wexler. She specializes in cases involving hidden marital assets. I have her number if you want it. I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief pulling at the center of my chest, something sharper, more purposeful. But as I reached for my phone to save the number Sabrina was reading out to me, she suddenly went quiet, staring at her own phone screen, which had just lit up with a text. What is it? I asked. She turned the phone toward me slowly, her hand trembling again, worse than before. The message was from Richard. Sent 4 minutes earlier, it read, "Someone's been in the Meridian shared drive. IT flagged it under your login. We need to talk now." Sabrina looked up at me, her face pale. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows something's missing, and he's going to figure out it was me." I had no idea. In that moment, sitting across from the woman who had slept with my husband, and was now the reason I finally understood the true scope of what he'd done, that the next 24 hours would bring both of us face to face with Richard, in a confrontation neither of us was fully prepared for. One that would end with a phone call to the police. We didn't have 24 hours, we barely had 2. Sabrina's phone buzzed again before we'd even finished paying for our coffee. Another message from Richard, this one shorter, angrier. "Call me back right now, Sabrina. This isn't a game." Then, a minute later, "I know you took the files. I can see the download logs." "He's not going to stop," Sabrina said, sliding her phone across the table like it had burned her. "He's going to keep pushing until I answer, and if I don't, he's going to show up at my apartment. He's done it before, when I tried to end things with him back in February." That detail landed harder than I expected. This wasn't a man who processed rejection quietly. This was a man used to controlling outcomes, used to 22 years of a wife who trusted him without question, and however many months of a mistress who'd been too afraid, or too in love, or too confused to push back. I thought about Cole coming home from school in a few hours, about Emma driving up from state that weekend, and a protective instinct rose in me that eclipsed even my own devastation. "Don't answer him," I said. "Not yet. We need to think about how we do this." "Do what exactly?" Sabrina asked. "Get ahead of him," I said, and I surprised myself with how calm I sounded, because inside I felt anything but calm. If he thinks he can contain this, control the narrative, scare you into silence, charm his way out of it, like he's charmed his way out of everything else his whole life, then he needs to learn today that the story's already out of his hands. We went back to my house first. I needed the folder somewhere safe, and more than that, I needed a moment in my own kitchen to breathe before whatever came next. I called the lawyer, Carol Ann Wexler, straight from Sabrina's contact list, and to my relief, her office fit me in for an emergency consultation that same afternoon. A cancellation, her assistant said. Pure luck, though I've since come to believe some things happen exactly when they're supposed to. Carol Ann Wexler was maybe 60, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had spent 3 decades watching men like Richard underestimate her. She read through the folder in near silence, occasionally making small sounds, a sharp intake of breath here, a slow exhale there, that told me more than words could have about how bad this actually was. "Mrs. Whitfield," she finally said, setting the papers down, I want to be direct with you because I think you can handle direct. This is not simply a divorce case. What you're showing me indicates a pattern of financial fraud that likely extends well beyond your marital assets. If Meridian Wellness Group's recruitment structure is what it appears to be, your husband may be operating something closer to a pyramid scheme, and the money moving through Halcyon Ventures could constitute money laundering, depending on its source and destination. I'd want forensic accountants involved immediately, and depending on what they find, this may not stay a private civil matter. You mean criminal charges, I said. I mean, it's possible, she said carefully. I don't want to promise you an outcome I can't guarantee, but I've seen enough of these situations to tell you that men who build secret financial structures rarely build just one. If he's hidden a company, an affair, and $240,000 from you, Mrs. Whitfield, I would be very surprised if that's the entire iceberg. I left her office with a retainer signed, an emergency asset freeze request already being drafted for our joint accounts, and a referral to a forensic accountant named Marcus Reyes, who Carol Ann said was relentless in the best possible way. For the first time since that Tuesday in March, I felt like the ground under me had stopped actively falling away. Richard called me 4 times that evening. I let all 4 go to voicemail. On the 5th call, I finally answered, mostly because I didn't want him showing up at the house unannounced with Cole home doing homework at the kitchen table. Diane, thank God, he said, and there was real relief in his voice, which almost made me laugh. He thought I was still the woman who cleared his dinner plate after he told her she was used up. Have you heard from anyone at my office? A woman named Sabrina maybe reached out to you? Why would she reach out to me, Richard? I asked, keeping my voice deliberately flat. There was a pause, just long enough for me to know he was calculating. No reason. It's just, there's some sensitive company information that went missing, and I think a disgruntled employee might be trying to cause problems. If anyone contacts you claiming to have documents about me, about the business, I need you to bring them straight to me. It could be dangerous information, legally speaking, if it falls into the wrong hands. I wouldn't want you getting pulled into anything messy. The audacity of it took my breath away. Him, warning me about messy situations, as though he hadn't spent 4 years constructing the mess himself, brick by brick, the same patient way he'd once built my trust. I'll keep that in mind, I said, and hung up before he could say anything else. The confrontation I'd been dreading came the next morning, not because I sought it out, but because Richard showed up at the house at 7:15 before Cole had even left for school, pounding on the front door in a way that made my son freeze halfway through pouring cereal. Mom, is that Dad? Cole asked, his voice tight in a way that told me he already sensed something was wrong beyond the divorce itself. Go finish getting ready for school, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I'll handle this. I opened the door to find Richard standing there in yesterday's clothes, hair disheveled, a version of him I'd genuinely never seen in 22 years. Not the polished sales director, not the charming man from the barbecue, but something rawer and more desperate, underneath. I need to know what she gave you, he said, not even bothering with a greeting. Sabrina, I know she found you. She's not answering my calls, and I need to know exactly what she told you before this spirals into something neither of us can control. You mean before you can control it, I said. That's really what you're worried about, isn't it? Not what you did. Just whether you can still manage the story. Something shifted in his face, anger thin and barely restrained beneath a layer of practiced calm. Diane, whatever she showed you, it's not what it looks like. Business finances are complicated. There are things about entrepreneurship you've simply never had to understand, because you never had to work outside this house. There it was, the same tone from that Tuesday in March, the same casual cruelty dressed up as reasonable explanation. 22 years of raising his children and running his household, and he still found a way to make my life sound smaller than his. I've retained a lawyer, I said, Carol Ann Wexler. You'll be hearing from her office today about an asset freeze on our joint accounts, pending a forensic audit into transfers made to Halcyon Ventures LLC over the last 2 years. I watched the blood drain slowly from his face, watched him recalculate in real time the way you can see a man doing math he desperately doesn't want to be doing. You don't understand what you're doing, he said, his voice lower now, almost pleading. If accounts get frozen, if this becomes a formal investigation, it's not just me who gets hurt, Diane. There are other people's money in Meridian, investors, people who trusted me. If this unravels the wrong way, it could take down more than just us. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you built something worth unraveling, I said. He stood on our porch for a long moment, and for just a second I saw something almost like grief pass over his face. Not for me, I understood even then, but for himself, for the version of his life he'd been so carefully protecting, now cracking open in the morning light for anyone to see. Then the grief hardened back into anger, and he turned and walked to his car without another word, peeling out of the driveway hard enough that I heard the tires squeal. I closed the door and found Cole standing in the hallway, backpack over one shoulder, having clearly heard more of that conversation than I would have wanted him to. Mom, he said quietly, what's Halcyon Ventures? I sat down with my 17-year-old son on the stairs that morning and told him more of the truth than I'd planned to tell him that early in everything, because I realized he deserved honesty more than he deserved protection at this point, and because some version of this story was going to reach him eventually. Better it come from me, gently, than from a rumor at school or an article in the local business section. That afternoon, Marcus Reyes, the forensic accountant, called with our first real findings, and what he told me made the number Sabrina had shown me look almost small by comparison. It wasn't $240,000. Once he traced the full pattern across 3 years of joint account statements, home equity draws, and a secondary credit line I hadn't even known existed under both our names, the number was closer to $510,000, funneled slowly, patiently, invisibly into Halcyon Ventures, and from there into at least two other accounts Marcus was still working to trace. I hung up the phone that afternoon and sat alone in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Richard had once told me I'd let myself go, and I felt the last, soft, forgiving part of me finally go quiet. Whatever compassion I still had left for the man I'd married was being replaced, methodically, fact by fact, with something clearer and colder and far more useful. I had no idea that within 48 hours, Marcus would uncover something in those financial records that went far beyond fraud, something that would explain not just where Richard's money had gone, but why Halcyon Ventures existed in the first place, and whose name, besides Richard's, was quietly listed as a founding partner. Marcus Reyes called me on a Wednesday evening, and I could hear something different in his voice the moment I picked up. Not the measured, professional tone he'd used in our previous calls, but something sharper, almost urgent. "Diane, I need you to sit down for this one," he said. I was already sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of me from the divorce filing Carol Ann's office had drafted that afternoon, but I appreciated the warning anyway. "I found the other founding partner on Halcyon Ventures," Marcus said. "It's not a business associate. It's not a random investor. Diane, it's your husband's mother." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, because out of every possibility I'd imagined over the last week, this hadn't been one of them. "Eleanor, Richard's mother? She's 73 years old. She barely knows how to use her iPad. She may not have known what she was signing," Marcus said carefully. "That's actually the more likely explanation, based on what I'm seeing. There's a trust that was established using funds from your father-in-law's life insurance policy after he passed 4 years ago, right around the same time Meridian Wellness Group was founded, which I don't think is a coincidence. Eleanor is listed as a silent partner, but the account activity, the signing authority, all of it traces back to Richard's own devices and IP addresses. It looks like he used his mother's inheritance, and her name as legal cover, to build this entire structure, likely without her full understanding of what she was agreeing to. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something shift inside my anger, a small, unwanted current of pity for a woman who had spent decades subtly making me feel inadequate at her Sunday dinner table, who I now understood might be as much a victim of her son's manipulation as I was, just in a quieter, more devastating way. "Does she know?" I asked. "I don't know yet," Marcus said, "but Diane, I think she needs to. Because if this goes to a formal fraud investigation, which given the numbers I'm seeing it very likely will, her name is on paperwork that could expose her to liability she never knowingly agreed to. Someone should tell her before law enforcement does." I thought about it for 2 days before I made the call. Eleanor and I had never been close, not in 22 years, not in the way daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law sometimes manage to become close despite everything. But I thought about my own mother, about what I would want if someone I trusted had quietly built a fraud scheme using my late husband's life insurance money without my knowledge, and I decided she deserved to hear it from someone who wasn't trying to save her son's reputation. Eleanor cried on the phone, not the performative tears I'd sometimes seen her produce at family gatherings when she wanted sympathy, but something rawer, something that told me Marcus's instinct had been right. She hadn't fully understood yet what she'd signed. Richard had told her it was a simple estate planning tool, something to protect his father's legacy from taxes. She'd trusted her only son completely, the same way I once had. "I want to help however I can," she told me, her voice still thick. "Diane, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was capable of this. I raised him better than this. I believed her." And more importantly, her willingness to cooperate with Marcus's investigation and hand over the trust documents became one of the most damning pieces of evidence against Richard, because it established a clear, unbroken chain showing exactly how he'd built Halcyon Ventures from money that was never fully his to use. The next 2 weeks moved fast in a way that felt almost unreal after the slow, suffocating months that had preceded them. Carol Ann filed for divorce formally, citing dissipation of marital assets, and requested the court freeze all joint and business-adjacent accounts pending the fraud investigation. Marcus's forensic report, once complete, ran to over 60 pages and detailed a scheme that was worse than any of us had initially understood. Richard hadn't just been running a shady wellness supplement pyramid scheme on the side. He'd been actively recruiting vulnerable young employees, mostly women in their 20s, promising them investment opportunities in Meridian's leadership tier, collecting buy-in fees that ranged from $10,000 to $40,000 each, and funneling a significant portion of that money not back into the business, but into personal expenses, hotel suites, jewelry, and yes, at least $60,000 traceable directly to gifts for Sabrina and, more recently, Jessica. When Marcus's report reached the district attorney's office, a step Carol Ann recommended, given the scale of what had been uncovered, it triggered something none of us fully anticipated. 3 other women, Former Meridian recruits who'd lost their buy-in money and quietly assumed it was simply a failed business venture came forward once word started circulating that an investigation was underway. One of them had put in her entire graduate school savings. Another had taken out a personal loan against Richard's assurance that returns within the first year would cover it twice over. Richard was arrested on a Thursday morning in early June, 2 months after Sabrina had first approached me in that grocery store cereal aisle. I found out because Cole saw it on the local news before I did, a segment about a regional business executive charged with securities fraud and wire fraud in connection with an alleged pyramid scheme. Richard's photo, his old work headshot, still handsome, still confident, displayed next to the anchor's somber expression. I won't pretend there wasn't something enormously complicated about watching that. Some small, stubborn part of me, the part that had loved him for 22 years, that had nursed him through his father's death and celebrated every promotion and stood beside him at both our children's births, felt a flicker of grief watching him escorted out of his apartment building in handcuffs on the evening news. But that part was quieter now, smaller, drowned out by the much larger part of me that thought about Sabrina's trembling hands in that coffee shop, about Jessica crying to a coworker about a man who told her his marriage was basically over, about Eleanor sobbing into the phone over money that had belonged to her late husband, about my own children discovering their father's face on the local news before their mother could prepare them for it. The divorce was finalized 4 months later, expedited given the ongoing criminal proceedings, and the settlement, thanks largely to Carol Ann's relentless work and Marcus's forensic documentation, awarded me not just an equitable division of what remained of our actual marital assets, but a significant claim against Richard's portion of any recovered fraud proceeds, given that so much of his scheme had been funded using money that originated from our joint accounts in the first place. It wasn't everything that had been taken. Some of it, Marcus told me gently, was likely gone for good, spent on things that couldn't be recovered, but it was enough. Enough to keep the house. Enough to help Emma finish school without loans. Enough, finally, to breathe. Richard pled guilty 8 months after his arrest, taking a deal that reduced his sentence in exchange for cooperating fully with restitution efforts for the women he'd defrauded. He received 4 years, with the possibility of parole after 2.5. I did not attend the sentencing. Emma did, sitting in the back row, and told me afterward that he'd looked smaller than she remembered, that when the judge read the restitution amounts owed to Sabrina, Jessica, and the other 3 women he hadn't looked up once. I think about Sabrina often, more than I expected to when this all began. We don't talk regularly. There's too much complicated history between us for anything like real friendship, and I don't think either of us wants to pretend otherwise. But she sent me a card last month, simple and handwritten, that said only, "Thank you for not hating me forever. I hope you're finding peace." I wrote back one line, "You gave me the truth when you didn't have to." That took more courage than you probably realize. I meant it. Whatever complicated feelings I still carry about her role in my marriage's collapse, I understand now that she was navigating her own manipulation by the same man who manipulated me for 2 decades, just from a different angle at a different age with far less power to protect herself than I'd had. As for me, I'm 50 years old now. I went back to interior design 11 months ago, first small jobs for friends of friends, word of mouth slowly building into something real. Last week I signed a contract for my first full commercial project, redesigning the lobby of a boutique hotel 2 towns over, and I sat in my car afterward and cried, not from grief this time, but from something that felt astonishingly close to pride. Cole graduated high school in the spring, valedictorian, a fact I know had nothing to do with anything Richard did or didn't do, and everything to do with a kid who'd quietly decided somewhere, in the middle of his parents' unraveling, that he was going to be steady, going to be good, going to prove to himself that whatever his father had become, it didn't have to define who he was. Emma is starting her senior year now, talking about publishing internships in the city, and I've watched both of my children move through this entire ordeal with a resilience that humbles me daily. Some nights I still think about that Tuesday in March, about the rain and the pot roast and the words, "used up," hanging in the kitchen air like something poisonous. I used to think those words were the worst thing that would ever be said to me. Now I understand they were simply the first crack in a dam that had been quietly failing for years, and that everything that came pouring through afterward, the betrayal, the fraud, the fear, the strange unexpected alliance with a woman who'd once been my husband's mistress, all of it somehow led me back to a version of myself I like far more than the one Richard left behind in that kitchen. I am not used up. I was never used up. I was simply waiting, without knowing it, for the moment I'd finally be forced to find out exactly what I was capable of. And it turns out I was capable of quite a lot.